I don't care about excuses, Peterson. I care about results. Mike Anderson's voice cut through the tension in the boardroom. 12 executives shifted uncomfortably as he tapped his Mont Blanc pen against the quarterly report. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle's skyline stood shrouded in mist, mirroring the cold precision of Anderson Tech's 50th floor conference room. Your department promised a 15% efficiency increase. We're at 7.3%. Mike's steel bowl eyes narrowed. Numbers don't lie. People do. Hey there, my wonderful story family. I just want to take a moment to say how much I appreciate each and every one of you. Your love and support mean the world to me. It's because of you that this journey feels so special. If my stories have been touching your heart, let me know in the comments. Just type, "I'm loving this," and tell me, how would you describe my storytelling in one word? Your thoughts mean so much to me and help me bring you even more unforgettable tales. Every day I pour my heart into crafting these stories, spending hours making sure they touch your soul and bring us closer together. If you want to support this journey, the best way to do that is by showing some love. Hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and spread these stories with your friends. And if you're new here, welcome to our story family. I'd love for you to be part of this incredible journey. Just hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now sit back, relax, and get ready for an unforgettable story, one that will touch your heart in ways you never expected. Let's begin. At 32, Mike Anderson had built Anderson Sustainable Technologies into a billion-dollar empire through ruthless efficiency and an almost supernatural ability to detect weakness in markets, in technology, and in people. The Wall Street Journal had dubbed him the algorithm for his data-driven approach to everything. "We'll recalibrate and have new projections by Monday," Peterson mumbled. Mike nodded once. "Make them realistic this time." Meeting adjourned. As the executives filed out, Mike remained seated, staring at the Seattle rain. For a moment. Just a flicker. The reflection in the glass wasn't the impeccably dressed CEO, but an 8-year-old boy standing in a different rain, watching his mother's car disappear down the driveway. Forever. "I need to focus on my career, Michael. Your father will explain." His father never did. Mike blinked the memory away. Sentiment was inefficient. He'd learned that lesson early. The penthouse elevator opened directly into Mike's living space, 5,000 square feet of minimalist luxury overlooking Elliott Bay, voice-activated everything, smart surfaces, climate control that adjusted to his body temperature, perfect. Empty. Silent. He loosened his tie and walked to the kitchen where the automated coffee system had his precisely timed afternoon espresso waiting, the house system activated at his presence. "Good evening, Mr. Anderson. Current temperature is 68 degrees. You have 3 messages." Mike sighed. Play messages. The first was from his assistant confirming tomorrow's meetings, the second from his investment manager, the third made him pause mid-sip. "Mr. Anderson, this is Claire from Elite Staffing Solutions. I understand the last 3 housekeepers didn't work out, but I believe we've found someone perfect for your specific requirements. Jessica Miller has exceptional references and doesn't mind your preference for minimal interaction. She can start tomorrow if that suits. Please confirm at your convenience." Mike frowned. His specific requirements were simple: do the job efficiently and leave him alone. Why was that so difficult? He glanced toward his home office where 3 potted plants, a housewarming gift from his VP of operations, were withering despite the automated watering system. Like everything in his life, they were precisely maintained and still failing to thrive. "Confirm the housekeeper," he told the system. "Standard access protocols." The next morning, the elevator announced an arrival. Mike checked his watch. 7:58 a.m. 2 minutes early. Promising. When the doors opened, Mike's first impression was stillness. Jessica Miller didn't rush in or fumble with bags. She simply stood there, a slender figure in a simple gray dress, chestnut hair pulled back, eyes an unusual shade somewhere between green and gold. "Mr. Anderson." Her voice was soft but clear. "I'm Jessica Miller. I prefer Jess." "Punctuality is appreciated, Ms. Miller." Mike extended his hand automatically. When their fingers touched, the overhead lights flickered, just once, barely noticeable. A strange current seemed to pass between them, and Mike withdrew his hand perhaps too quickly. Static electricity, he muttered, though the air wasn't particularly dry. Jess smiled slightly. Of course. As Mike showed her around, he noticed how she moved, with an almost preternatural grace, her footsteps making no sound on the hardwood floors. She asked practical questions about his preferences, schedule, and expectations, but her eyes kept drifting to the dying plants in his office. "Those are beyond saving," Mike said dismissively. "Feel free to dispose of them." "They're not dead yet," Jess replied, her fingertips hovering just above a drooping leaf. "Sometimes things just need the right kind of attention." Mike's phone chimed with a weather alert. "Severe storm warning for Greater Seattle area," the automated voice announced. "It'll be worse than they're predicting," Jess said quietly. Mike raised an eyebrow. "The meteorological department uses advanced predictive algorithms. Some things can't be calculated." Her eyes met his, and for a second Mike could have sworn they reflected light like a cat's. "The storm will hit hardest around midnight. You might want to reconsider your flight tomorrow morning." Mike stared at her, unsettled by her certainty. "I'll take that under advisement." As he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in his perfectly ordered world, like the first tremor before an earthquake. Have you ever met someone who seemed to have an almost magical effect on your life from the moment you met them? Share your experience in the comments below. 3 days after Jess's arrival, Mike was deep into quarterly projections when a steaming cup appeared at his elbow. He jerked back, nearly knocking over his chair. "I apologize for startling you," Jess said, standing beside his desk. She hadn't made a sound entering his office, no footsteps, no door creak, nothing. "How do you do that?" Mike demanded, heart still racing. "Do what, Mr. Anderson?" "Move so quietly." A small smile touched her lips. "I've always been light on my feet." Mike glanced at the cup she'd placed beside him, black coffee with a hint of cinnamon, exactly what he needed after 4 hours of spreadsheets, though he hadn't mentioned wanting anything. "Thank you," he said, taking a sip. "Perfect temperature, but next time announce yourself." "Of course." She turned to leave, then paused by the formerly dying plants, which now showed small green shoots and unfurling leaves. Her fingers hovered just above them without touching, almost like a benediction. "How did you revive those?" Mike asked, genuinely curious. "The automated system couldn't keep them alive." "Plants respond to attention, not just water and light." She spoke without turning. "Sometimes machines miss what living things need most." After she left, Mike found himself staring at the plants. In 3 days, they'd gone from nearly dead to vibrant. He pulled up the security feed, fast-forwarding through footage of Jess in his office. She watered them only once, spending most time simply standing near them, her back to the camera. By the end of the first week, Mike noticed other changes. His insomnia had improved. The penthouse felt different. Warmer somehow, though the temperature settings remained unchanged. He emerged from his bedroom at 2 a.m., unable to sleep despite the improvement, and found the kitchen light on. Jess stood at the window, watching the city lights, a steaming mug in her hands. She wore a long-sleeved robe that covered her completely despite the warm night. "Trouble sleeping?" she asked without turning. "How did you know it was me?" "Your footsteps. Everyone's are unique." She finally turned, those unusual eyes catching the low light. "I've made chamomile tea with lavender and valerian root. It helps with restless thoughts." Mike approached cautiously. "You knew I'd be awake." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "You haven't slept well in years, Mr. Anderson. It's in the tension you carry." She gestured to a second mug on the counter. "The tea will help." He should have found her presumption irritating. Instead, he took the mug, noticing how she shifted slightly to maintain distance between them. "You don't like being touched," he observed. "I'm selective about physical contact." Her gaze returned to the window. "The connection can be overwhelming." Energy transfers between people. Most aren't aware of it." She sipped her tea. You should drink before it cools. The tea tasted better than any chamomile he'd tried before. Within minutes, a pleasant heaviness settled over him. He slept through the night for the first time in months. You look different, Mike, David Chen, his VP of Operations, commented during their weekly lunch. Less intense. Mike frowned. I'm exactly the same. No, there's definitely something. David studied him. You're sleeping better? New workout routine? Finally dating someone? I hired a new housekeeper. David laughed. And that's put this strange light in your eyes? She must be something. She's efficient, Mike said curtly, uncomfortable with the observation. Nothing more. But on the drive back to his penthouse, Mike found himself reflecting on the changes of the past 2 weeks. His home felt more alive. The plants weren't just surviving, but thriving, spreading green tendrils across his formerly sterile office. His chronic headaches had diminished. Even his decision-making at work seemed sharper, more intuitive. All coinciding with Jess's arrival. That evening, Mike arrived home earlier than usual. The penthouse was filled with soft classical music, Debussy's Clair de Lune, though he couldn't locate any speakers playing it. The scent of rosemary and lemon hung in the air. He found Jess in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with precise, fluid movements. She wore a high-necked blouse despite the warm day, her hair twisted up to reveal the nape of her neck. As always, her right shoulder remained carefully covered. You're early, she said without looking up. Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. How did you know to prepare dinner? I rarely eat at home. You had a difficult meeting today. After such meetings, you usually work late, but today you needed space to think. Her knife never paused its rhythm. You haven't eaten since 7 a.m. Mike stared at her. How could you possibly know that? Your calendar is synced to the house system. A plausible explanation, but it didn't account for knowing his emotional state or eating habits. As she reached for herbs hanging near the window, sunlight caught her at an angle, and for a moment Mike thought he saw a faint luminescence beneath her blouse, tracing a pattern across her right shoulder blade. She shifted quickly, moving out of the direct light. Is there something on your shoulder? He asked. Her hands stilled. A scar. Old injury. It looked like it was glowing? A trick of the light. Her voice remained calm, but the overhead lights dimmed slightly. Nothing more. Later, as they ate the most delicious meal he'd had in months, Mike noticed how Jess deflected personal questions with practiced ease, redirecting conversation to his work, his preferences, his life. She was a mirror, reflecting his world back to him while revealing nothing of herself. The mystery of Jessica Miller deepened with each passing day. Mike began paying closer attention. He noticed how electronics sometimes behaved erratically around Jess, lights flickering, his phone battery draining or suddenly charging, the house system activating without commands. Always subtle, always explainable as technical glitches, but the pattern was unmistakable. He observed how plants seemed to lean toward her as she passed, how his chronically dry skin had improved without changing his routine, how rooms felt warmer in her presence, despite unchanged thermostat settings. Most unsettling was her anticipation of his needs. Coffee appeared moments before he realized he wanted it. Aspirin waited on his nightstand before his tension headache fully formed. Documents he needed were organized before he searched for them. One evening he returned from a frustrating board meeting to find his favorite childhood comfort food, a specific tomato soup his mother used to make, waiting on the kitchen counter. He'd never mentioned it to anyone, not even in passing. How did you know? He asked, voice barely steady. Jess looked up from arranging flowers. Wildflowers that shouldn't be in season. Know what? This soup. My mother's recipe. You seemed like you needed comfort today. She continued arranging the flowers, which appeared to bloom more fully under her touch. It just felt right. Mike set down his briefcase. Who are you, really? Her hand stilled. Just your housekeeper, Mr. Anderson. No one is just anything. He stepped closer, noticing how she subtly shifted away, maintaining distance. Normal housekeepers don't move silently, anticipate needs before they're expressed, or make plants grow by looking at them. A small smile touched her lips. You're very observant. I built a billion-dollar company by noticing patterns others miss. And what pattern have you noticed about me? That you're hiding something. The lights dimmed slightly as he spoke. Something connected to that scar you keep covered? For a moment, her composed facade faltered. The flowers she'd been arranging suddenly bloomed fully, as if time lapsed, petals unfurling before his eyes. The air between them seemed to vibrate with unspoken energy. We all have scars, Mr. Anderson. Her voice was soft but steady. Some are just more visible than others. Before he could respond, his phone chimed with an urgent weather alert. The storm Jess had predicted, the one meteorologist had initially classified as moderate, had intensified dramatically. All flights were grounded. Coastal warnings issued. Mike stared at the alert, then at Jess. You knew. I feel storms. She turned toward the window where dark clouds gathered on the horizon, much closer than the forecast had predicted. This one will be significant. Thunder rumbled in the distance as if summoned by her words. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Your business trip, she said quietly. You should cancel it. Mike found himself nodding, unable to look away from her silhouette against the darkening sky. For the first time in his meticulously controlled life, he felt the certainty that he stood on the edge of something vast and unexplainable, something that both terrified and exhilarated him. The storm was coming, in more ways than one. The storm hit Seattle with apocalyptic fury. Rain lashed against the penthouse windows like liquid bullets, while wind howled between skyscrapers, creating an eerie, almost human wail. Mike's driver had insisted on taking him home when the power grid for half the city failed. Never seen anything like it, sir, the driver had shouted over the deluge as they pulled up to Mike's building. It's like the storm has a mind of its own. The lobby was running on emergency power, dim lights casting long shadows across marble floors. The security guard looked relieved to see him. Mr. Anderson, elevators are operational but unstable. Building management recommends everyone stay put until the storm passes. I'll take my chances, Mike replied, stepping into his private elevator. As the doors closed, he caught the guard making the sign of the cross. The ascent was jerky, lights flickering with each thunderclap. Mike checked his phone. No service. He'd texted Jess earlier about his return, but the message showed undelivered. She wouldn't be expecting him. The elevator lurched to a stop at the penthouse level. When the doors opened, Mike stepped into darkness broken only by intermittent flashes of lightning through the windows. The emergency generator should have kicked in automatically. House system activate, he commanded. Nothing happened. A flash of lightning illuminated the living room for a split second, long enough for Mike to see that furniture had been moved, creating a clear path to the windows, as if someone had been watching the storm. Jess, he called out, navigating by memory and the sporadic lightning. No answer came, but he noticed a faint glow emanating from the hallway leading to the guest quarters. Not emergency lighting, something softer, bluer. Mike followed it. A strange electricity seeming to crackle in the air around him. The fine hairs on his arms stood on end. The door to Jess's room was ajar, that ethereal blue light spilling through the crack. Mike approached cautiously, hearing what sounded like humming. A melody he couldn't place, but that somehow felt ancient. Jess, the power's out. Are you... He pushed the door open and froze. Jess stood by the window, her back to him, completely unaware of his presence. She'd been caught in the storm, her uniform soaked through, clinging to her slender frame. She was in the process of changing, having removed her sodden blouse, wearing only a simple camisole that left her shoulders exposed. But it wasn't her partial undress that stopped Mike's breath in his throat. It was the scar. Spanning her right shoulder blade was an intricate pattern that glowed with an internal blue-white light, pulsing gently in rhythm with the storm outside. The pattern wasn't random. It formed a complex fractal design reminiscent of lightning branches or river deltas, extending tendrils down her spine and across her shoulder. As Mike stood transfixed, a massive lightning bolt struck somewhere nearby. The entire room blazed white for a split second, and in that moment, the luminescent pattern on Jess's skin flared brilliantly. The light refracted around her body, casting prismatic rainbows across the walls and ceiling, transforming the simple room into something from another world. Jess gasped and turned, her eyes meeting Mike's. Time seemed to stop. In that suspended moment, her eyes reflected the same luminescence as her scar. Pupils expanded until only a thin ring of gold-green remained. The air between them felt charged, dense with potential energy. Mike couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. Caught in a moment that his rational mind struggled to process. Then the lightning faded, plunging them back into relative darkness, broken only by the glow of her scar. "Mr. Anderson," she whispered, reaching for a robe to cover herself. The movement broke the spell. "I'm sorry," Mike stammered, finding his voice. "The power's out. I called, but you didn't answer. I saw light." As she secured the robe, the glow from her scar dimmed, but didn't disappear entirely. Her face was a mask of controlled panic. "You weren't supposed to see this," she said quietly. "What? What is that?" Mike gestured toward her shoulder, now covered but still faintly visible through the fabric. "A reminder." Her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Of death and return." Thunder crashed directly overhead, and the entire penthouse electrical system surged. Lights blazed to full brightness, then dimmed to nothing. Appliances in the kitchen activated and shut down. Mike's phone in his pocket grew hot, then cold. "You're doing that," he said, the realization hitting him with certainty. "Not intentionally." Jess closed her eyes, taking deep breaths. The electrical chaos gradually subsided. Strong emotions make it harder to control. Mike's scientific mind raced through possibilities. Bioluminescent implants, rare medical conditions, elaborate hoaxes. But none fit what he'd witnessed. "What are you?" he asked finally. The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Jess's expression shifted from fear to something more complex, a mixture of resignation and relief. "I'm still figuring that out myself," she answered softly. "But I'm not dangerous, if that's what you're asking." Another lightning flash, another surge of brightness from her scar. This time, Mike noticed how the pattern seemed to shift subtly, like a living thing beneath her skin. "The accident," she said, answering his unspoken question. 3 minutes clinically dead. When I came back, I was different." Mike took an involuntary step backward, his back hitting the doorframe. "Different how?" "More connected. To energy patterns, to living things, to—" She gestured toward the raging storm outside. "To this." The rational, data-driven CEO in Mike wanted to dismiss everything, to call it an elaborate deception or hallucination from overwork. But he'd built his success on trusting his observations, and what he'd observed defied conventional explanation. "I should go," he said stiffly, needing space to process. "Of course," Jess nodded, keeping her distance. "I understand if you want me to leave tomorrow." The thought of her leaving produced an unexpected pang of loss. Despite his confusion and disbelief, Mike found himself shaking his head. "No, that's not necessary." He struggled to find words. "I just need time to think." Relief flickered across her face. "Thank you." As Mike turned to leave, a final question occurred to him. "The plants in my office, the way you move without sound, my headaches disappearing, the tea that helps me sleep, are all these things connected to whatever this is?" A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Everything is connected, Mr. Anderson. Most people just can't see the threads." Mike retreated to his bedroom, mind reeling. He sat in darkness as the storm raged, listening to the thunder and watching occasional flashes of lightning illuminate his room. His phone remained dead, his laptop powerless. Cut off from technology, from data, from the rational systems that had defined his existence. For the first time since childhood, Mike Anderson confronted something he couldn't analyze, quantify, or control. The sensation was both terrifying and strangely exhilarating. In the guest room, Jess stood by her window, one hand pressed against the glass. Outside, the storm's pattern shifted subtly, lightning strikes moving farther from the building, the wind's howl softening to a moan. Her scar pulsed with each thunderclap, growing fainter as the storm gradually subsided. She'd been seen, truly seen, for the first time since her transformation. The relief of that revelation warred with fear of what would come next. Mike Anderson was a man of science and logic. How long before curiosity turned to fear? How many others had reacted with revulsion when they glimpsed what she'd become? The storm continued through the night, but its heart had moved on, leaving behind only echoes of its fury, much like the secret now exposed between them. The morning after the storm brought an uneasy truce. Mike emerged from his bedroom to find the penthouse immaculate, as if the chaos had never happened. Jess moved about her duties with the same quiet efficiency, though she now announced her presence before entering rooms. The glowing scar remained hidden beneath high-necked blouses. Neither mentioned what had transpired. For 3 days, Mike buried himself in work, staying late at the office, scheduling early meetings, anything to minimize their interaction. But questions consumed his thoughts, distracting him during board presentations and waking him at night. On the 4th evening, he arrived home to find Jess preparing dinner, the kitchen filled with enticing aromas. "You're cooking," he observed unnecessarily, hovering in the doorway. "You've been skipping meals." She didn't look up from chopping herbs. "Your body needs nourishment, especially when your mind is preoccupied." Mike hesitated, then stepped into the kitchen. "Can I help?" Surprise flickered across her face. "If you'd like. Could you slice the bread?" It was a peace offering of sorts. Mike rolled up his sleeves and took the knife she offered. They worked in silence for several minutes, the simple domesticity easing the tension between them. "I have questions," he said finally. "I know." Jess stirred something that smelled of saffron and sea. "I'll answer what I can. Have you always been like this?" "No, just since the accident." She added a pinch of something to the pot. 3 years ago." "And what exactly happened?" "Lightning strike. Direct hit while I was collecting field samples for an environmental impact study." Her voice remained steady, clinical. My heart stopped for 3 minutes 17 seconds before paramedics revived me. Mike's knife slipped, slicing deeply into his thumb. "Damn it!" Blood welled immediately, dripping onto the cutting board. Jess turned and, without thinking, reached for his hand. The moment her fingers touched his, the sharp pain vanished. Mike watched, transfixed, as she cradled his bleeding thumb between her palms. A subtle warmth spread through his hand, accompanied by a faint tingling sensation. When she released him, the bleeding had stopped. The cut remained, but it looked days old rather than seconds. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping back. "Instinct." Mike stared at his thumb, pressing it experimentally. No pain. "You healed it. Accelerated your body's natural healing process." She turned back to the stove, avoiding his gaze. "I should have asked permission." "Is that why my chronic headaches disappeared? My insomnia improved?" Mike's mind raced. "Have you been healing me all this time?" "Not deliberately. It's more passive with prolonged proximity." She stirred the pot with focused attention. "Living things respond to my presence now. Plants, animals, people." Mike examined his thumb again. The cut was already forming a scab that should have taken hours to develop. "Why didn't you tell me?" A sad smile touched her lips. "Would you have believed me without seeing it yourself?" The truth of her words silenced him. Of course he wouldn't have. Even now, his rational mind searched for explanations, rare medical conditions, psychosomatic responses, elaborate deceptions. "The bread is ruined," he said finally, gesturing to the blood-stained cutting board. "We have plenty." She served 2 bowls of the fragrant stew. "Sit, eat. Your body needs to replace the blood you lost." By morning, the cut on Mike's thumb had healed completely, leaving only the faintest pink line. He studied it in his office, comparing photos he'd taken the night before. The accelerated healing defied medical explanation. He found himself watching Jess with new awareness. The way plants seemed to stretch toward her as she passed, How the chronic pain in his shoulder, a college rowing injury, had vanished without him noticing. The way electronics behaved erratically in her presence, especially when her emotions ran high. Most disturbing was his own response to her. Despite the rational impossibility of what he'd witnessed, he felt drawn to her presence. The air seemed clearer when she was near, colors more vibrant, his thoughts sharper, more intuitive. "You're affecting me," he accused one evening, finding her arranging flowers that had bloomed out of season. Yes. No denial, no explanation, just quiet acknowledgement. "I don't like being influenced without my consent." She turned to face him fully. "Would you prefer I leave?" The question should have been easy to answer. Instead, Mike found himself hesitating, the thought of her departure creating an unexpected hollow sensation in his chest. "No," he admitted finally. "But I need to understand." 2 nights later, another storm rolled in, smaller than the first, but still powerful enough to knock out power to their section of the city. Mike returned from work to find the penthouse illuminated by dozens of candles, their warm glow creating islands of light in the darkness. Jess sat cross-legged on the floor near the windows, watching the approaching storm. She wore a simple white dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. The candles nearest her burned brighter, their flames stretching taller than the others. "The backup generator failed," she said without turning. "I thought you might prefer candles to darkness." Mike set down his briefcase and joined her on the floor, maintaining a careful distance. "You're not afraid of storms, even after what happened to you?" "Why fear something that's part of you?" She turned slightly, and in the candlelight her eyes seemed to reflect the flames like a cat's. "The lightning didn't take from me. It gave." "What exactly did it give you?" She considered the question, watching shadows dance across the walls, shadows that seemed to move independently of the candle flames, forming patterns too deliberate to be random. "Awareness," she said finally, "of energy flows, of connections between living systems, of patterns most people can't perceive." "That sounds more like delusion than gift," Mike said, then immediately regretted his harshness. To his surprise, Jess laughed, a genuine sound that made the candle flames pulse in response. "That was my first thought, too. I spent 6 months convinced I was having a psychotic break." "What changed your mind?" "Empirical evidence?" She gestured to a dying orchid on a nearby table. As Mike watched, she extended her hand toward it, not quite touching. The wilted petals gradually straightened, color returning to the pale blooms. Hard to argue with observable phenomena. Mike's scientific mind immediately sought explanations. Air currents, temperature changes, optical illusions, but found none that fit. "You said you were collecting field samples when it happened," he said, changing tactics. "What kind of work did you do?" "Environmental engineering." The words slipped out before she could catch herself. She looked away quickly, but not before Mike caught the flash of pain in her eyes. "You're not just a housekeeper." Lightning flashed outside, briefly illuminating her profile. "Not originally, no." "What happened?" The candles dimmed as her expression darkened. "I was leading a project assessing contamination levels in wetlands near a chemical plant. We found evidence of illegal dumping, toxins leaching into groundwater that fed into the city reservoir. Let me guess, the company buried your findings?" "Worse, they discredited them and me." Her voice remained steady, but the shadows on the walls twisted into agitated patterns. "Claimed I falsified data after they rejected my romantic advances. Classic character assassination." "Did you take legal action?" "With what resources?" "It was my word against a multinational corporation." She shrugged, a gesture belied by the tension in her shoulders. "Then the accident happened, and suddenly my credibility issues included mental instability after my near-death experience." Mike studied her in the flickering light. "So you became a housekeeper." "I became invisible," she corrected. "It's easier to rebuild when no one's watching." A comfortable silence fell between them. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, while thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, the candles burned with unnatural steadiness, creating a sanctuary of warm light. "I've never told anyone that story," Jess said quietly. "Why tell me?" She turned to face him fully, and for a moment Mike thought he saw that luminescent pattern flickering beneath the skin of her throat. "Because you saw me, really saw me, and you're still here." The simple truth of her words resonated through him. Despite everything, the impossibility of her condition, the rational objections of his mind, he remained drawn to her presence, to the mystery she embodied. "I built my life on observable data and logical conclusions," Mike said, watching the candlelight play across her features. "You defy both. And yet you haven't fired me or reported me to some government lab." A small smile touched her lips. "Your actions contradict your stated principles, Mr. Anderson." "Mike," he corrected automatically. "If we're discussing my philosophical inconsistencies, you should use my first name." Her smile widened, and the candles around them blazed brighter in response. "Mike." Something shifted between them in that moment. A boundary crossed, a connection acknowledged. Mike found himself leaning slightly closer, drawn by something beyond physical attraction. The air between them seemed to vibrate with potential energy. A sudden thunderclap broke the spell. The lights flickered on as power returned to the building, harsh electric light replacing the intimate glow of candles. Jess stood in one fluid motion. "It's late. You should rest." As she moved to leave, Mike caught her wrist. The first time he'd deliberately initiated contact since discovering her secret. A jolt of something like static electricity passed between them, and for a split second he could have sworn he felt her emotions. A complex swirl of fear, hope, and longing. "What was that?" he asked, releasing her. "Connection?" She stepped back, rubbing her wrist. "It happens sometimes, with physical contact. I'm sorry." "Don't be." The sensation had been startling but not unpleasant. "It's fascinating." A guarded expression crossed her face. "I'm not an experiment, Mike." "No," he agreed, suddenly ashamed of his clinical interest. "You're much more complicated than that." After she left, Mike remained seated on the floor, surrounded by candles that now burned with ordinary flames. His rational mind continued to search for explanations that science could accept, while something deeper, something he'd suppressed since childhood, whispered that some truths existed beyond current scientific understanding. For the first time in his adult life, Mike Anderson found himself caught between the world as he'd always understood it and the possibility that reality was far stranger and more wondrous than he'd allowed himself to believe. Have you ever experienced something you couldn't explain rationally, but felt deeply true? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you're enjoying their mysterious connection. The dream came 3 nights later. Mike stood in a forest clearing beside a small waterfall cascading into a crystal-clear pool. Sunlight filtered through ancient trees, creating dappled patterns on moss-covered stones. The air smelled of pine and wild mint. He knew he wasn't alone even before turning. Jess stood at the water's edge, her back to him, that luminescent pattern on her shoulder fully visible and pulsing with gentle blue light. She wore a simple white dress that seemed to shimmer between solid fabric and something more ethereal. "This is your place," Mike said, somehow knowing it was true. She turned, unsurprised by his presence. "Since I was 7, no one else knows about it." "Then how am I here?" She smiled, extending her hand. "You tell me. It's your dream." Mike woke with a start, the scent of pine and mint lingering in his nostrils. The dream had been so vivid, not the usual fragmented imagery, but a fully realized experience with sensory details his mind couldn't possibly have invented. At breakfast, he found Jess arranging wildflowers in a vase, the same varieties that had grown around the dream waterfall. "I had an unusual dream last night," he said casually, watching her reaction. "A forest with a small waterfall feeding into a pool, unusual rock formations on the left side, almost like a natural staircase." The vase slipped from Jess's hands, hovering for an impossible moment before she caught it. Her face had gone pale. "The water was so clear you could see river stones at the bottom," Mike continued, "and wild mint grew along the banks." "How do you know about that place?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "So it's real. It's private?" A defensive edge crept into her tone. "A place I found as a child, 3 miles from my grandmother's cabin in the Olympic Peninsula. I've never told anyone about it." Mike set down his coffee. "I've never been to the Olympic Peninsula." They stared at each other across the kitchen island, the implications hanging between them. If Mike had dreamed of a real place he'd never seen, a place significant to Jess that she'd never described, then something beyond conventional explanation was occurring. "It's happening more quickly than I expected," Jess murmured, almost to herself. "What is?" "The connection." She gestured vaguely between them. "Proximity accelerates it, especially with," she hesitated, "compatible energy patterns." "You're saying we're becoming psychically linked?" Mike couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "I'm saying energy doesn't recognize the boundaries we imagine between separate beings." She touched one of the wildflowers, which visibly straightened and brightened. "Everything is connected. Most people just can't perceive it." Mike glanced around the penthouse, suddenly aware of how much had changed. Plants that had once struggled to survive now thrived everywhere. Ferns cascading from shelves, vines creeping elegantly along windowsills, orchids blooming out of season. The sterile, minimalist space had transformed into something alive, vibrant, like him. That night, Mike sat in his home office, laptop open to research papers on near-death experiences and electromagnetic sensitivity. Most were dismissive, explaining away phenomena as oxygen deprivation or temporal lobe seizures. A few fringe studies suggested more radical possibilities, that consciousness might interact with electromagnetic fields in ways science hadn't yet quantified. He clicked through medical imaging of brain activity, wondering if similar scans of Jess would show abnormalities. The thought made him uncomfortable, reducing her to a subject of study rather than a person. A notification appeared on his screen. Invitation to the annual Innovation for Earth Gala, a charity event where tech leaders showcased environmental initiatives. Mike usually sent a donation and skipped the actual event, finding such gatherings tedious. This year felt different. He found Jess in the small greenhouse she'd created on the penthouse balcony, tending to plants under the moonlight. She wore thin cotton gloves, but even through the fabric, her touch seemed to invigorate the seedlings. "There's a charity event next weekend," Mike said without preamble. "The Innovation for Earth Gala. Would you like to attend?" "With me?" Jess looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "As your date?" "As my guest." As my guest, the distinction felt important somehow. The foundation felt important across all ranks. The foundation felt an important across all industry. All ages. Bricks, buildings, brick, but brick upon brick. As my guest. 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 She turned back to the plants, her movements suddenly tense. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because people from my former life will be there." Her voice was tight. "People who believed the lies about me. All the more reason to go. Show them who you really are." A bitter laugh escaped her. Which version? The discredited engineer or the woman who glows during thunderstorms? Mike stepped closer. The brilliant woman who survived something impossible and emerged stronger. She looked up at him, moonlight reflecting in her unusual eyes. "You don't understand what you're asking. I can't control this. In emotional situations." She gestured to her shoulder, where even through her gardening clothes, a faint luminescence was visible. "What if someone notices?" "We'll manage." The words came easily, surprising him with their certainty. "I'm good at deflecting attention when necessary." Jez studied him for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" It was a fair question. one Mike wasn't entirely sure he could answer. His rational mind suggested professional networking and charitable obligation. Something deeper recognized a desire to see Jess reclaim part of herself that had been taken. "Because you shouldn't have to hide who you are," he said finally, "either version." The week before the gala brought a new level of tension to the penthouse. Jess alternated between anxiety and determination, practicing techniques to maintain emotional equilibrium in stressful situations. Mike found himself oddly protective, rearranging his schedule to help her prepare. 3 days before the event, a designer delivered several evening gowns for Jess to consider. Mike returned from work to find her standing before the mirror in his bedroom, the only full-length mirror in the penthouse, wearing a midnight blue gown that left her shoulders bare. She hadn't heard him enter, focused entirely on the reflection of her exposed scar. In the artificial light, the luminescent pattern was subtle but unmistakable, a delicate tracery of light beneath her skin that shifted and pulsed with her breathing. "It's beautiful," Mike said quietly. Jess startled, the lights in the room flickering in response. "It's conspicuous." She reached for a shawl, draping it over her shoulders. "Even with makeup, someone might notice." "Only if they're looking closely," Mike approached, stopping a respectful distance away. "And most people at these events are too self-absorbed to notice anything beyond their immediate interests." "You noticed things about me from the beginning," she pointed out. "I'm not most people." The statement wasn't arrogance but simple fact. "And neither are you." Jess turned back to the mirror, adjusting the shawl. "I haven't attended a formal event since before the accident. I'm not sure I remember how to be normal." "Overrated concept." Mike leaned against the doorframe. "Besides, you've managed to appear normal while living with someone who watches you like a science experiment." A small smile touched her lips. "Is that what you're doing?" "At first, maybe." He met her eyes in the mirror. "Now I'm just trying to understand." "Understand what?" "Why I dream about places I've never seen. Why my plants are growing through their pots. Why I can feel your presence in a room before I see you." He took a step closer. "Why, despite every rational objection, I find myself drawn to you." The lights dimmed slightly, the air between them growing charged with that now familiar energy. For a moment, Mike thought he saw faint luminescent patterns in the air itself, connecting them like invisible threads. "Proximity effect," Jess whispered, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "It'll fade when we're apart. Is that what you want? For this to fade?" She turned to face him directly, the shawl slipping slightly to reveal the edge of her scar. "What I want doesn't matter. Eventually you'll need to understand this scientifically or dismiss it entirely. That's who you are." "You don't know who I am." The words came out more sharply than intended. "I know you better than you think." Her gaze was steady, challenging. "I know you check your security feeds to watch me with the plants when you think I'm not aware. I know you've been researching neural responses to electromagnetic fields. I know you keep a journal of observable phenomena associated with my presence." Mike felt heat rise to his face. "All true. I also know," she continued more softly, "that you've started meditating in the greenhouse when I'm not there. That you've been dreaming of places you've never seen. That sometimes, when you think I can't see, you look at me with something beyond scientific curiosity." The admission hung between them, neither willing to close the final distance. "The gala is in 3 days," Mike said finally. "We should finish your preparation." Jess nodded, gathering the shawl more securely around her shoulders. As she moved past him toward the door, their arms brushed. The briefest contact. A spark jumped between them, visible in the dimmed light, and for a heartbeat, Mike felt what she felt. Fear, hope, and something deeper that neither was ready to name. The Innovation for Earth Gala transformed the Seattle Art Museum into an eco-futurist's dream. Living walls of plants, framed interactive displays showcasing environmental technologies. Sustainable materials gleamed under artfully arranged lighting. Even the food, locally sourced, carbon-neutral, perfected the event's mission. Mike navigated the crowd with practiced ease, nodding to tech executives and venture capitalists while keeping Jess close at his side. She wore the midnight blue gown with a cleverly designed wrap that concealed her shoulder without appearing obvious. Her hair was swept up elegantly, revealing the nape of her neck where the faintest trace of luminescence occasionally flickered when the lights dimmed. "Breathe," Mike murmured, noticing her tension. "No one's paying attention to us." "Not yet," Jess replied, her eyes scanning the room, but she froze mid-sentence, her gaze fixed on a group near the sustainable water purification display. A tall man with silver-streaked hair was gesturing enthusiastically to investors, his commanding presence drawing attention. "Robert Keller?" she whispered, her voice tight. "My former mentor, the one who led the character assassination." Mike followed her gaze, assessing the man with cold precision. "The CEO of Neochem? Chief Scientific Officer. He buried my findings when they threatened a major product launch." Her hands trembled slightly, causing the champagne in her glass to vibrate. "We should leave. We just arrived." Mike placed his hand at the small of her back, steadying her. "He hasn't seen you." "Mike Anderson!" A booming voice cut through their conversation. Robert Keller approached, hand extended, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you actually attending instead of just writing checks." "Robert." Mike's greeting was cool but polite. "I've been taking a more active interest in environmental initiatives lately." Keller's gaze shifted to Jess, a flicker of confusion crossing his features before recognition dawned. "Jessica Miller, is that you?" The lights above them dimmed momentarily. Jess straightened her spine, meeting his gaze directly. "Dr. Keller? Well, this is unexpected." Keller's smile turned predatory. "Last I heard, you were having some mental health challenges after your accident." "Ha, I recovered," Jess replied evenly. "Evidently." His gaze flicked between her and Mike, calculation evident. "And now you're— what exactly? Anderson's date?" Before Jess could respond, Mike stepped slightly forward. "Ms. Miller consults on environmental impact for Anderson Technologies. Her expertise has been invaluable." The lie rolled smoothly off his tongue, creating a professional context that demanded respect. Jess shot him a grateful glance. "Consulting? How interesting." Keller's tone suggested it was anything but. "Especially given the circumstances of her departure from the field." The champagne glasses on a nearby table began to vibrate subtly. A server passing with a tray of hors d'oeuvres stumbled as the lights flickered again. "Perhaps you could refresh my memory about those circumstances," Mike said, his voice dangerously soft. "I find first-hand accounts are often more reliable than industry gossip." Keller's smile faltered. "It was unfortunate, really. Promising young engineer, but when her findings weren't immediately accepted, she made some unfounded accusations. Then that bizarre lightning incident." "My findings weren't not accepted," Jess interrupted, her voice steady despite the electrical disturbances intensifying around them. "They were deliberately suppressed because they showed Neochem's new polymer was leaching endocrine disruptors into groundwater." Mike's expression remained impassive, but his mind was racing, connecting pieces. Neochem's revolutionary biodegradable polymer had launched to international acclaim 3 years ago, exactly when Jess would have been conducting her research. "These are serious allegations, Ms. Miller," Keller said, his affable mask slipping. "Allegations that were thoroughly investigated and dismissed." "By a board on which you sat," Jess countered. "After you suggested I was emotionally unstable and romantically obsessed with you." The lights dimmed dramatically throughout the entire gallery. Several electronic displays flickered and reset. Jess took a deep breath, visibly struggling for control. "If you'll excuse us," Mike said smoothly, "we have other guests to greet." He guided Jess away, feeling the barely contained energy radiating from her. The wrap had slipped slightly, revealing a faint blue glow at the edge of her shoulder. "Your shoulder," he murmured. Jess adjusted the fabric quickly. "I need air." They slipped through French doors onto a deserted balcony overlooking the city. The moment they were alone, Jess braced herself against the railing, taking deep breaths, as small arcs of blue-white energy danced briefly between her fingers. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't have come. I'm glad you did." Mike stood beside her, careful not to touch her while she regained control. "Neochem's polymer. That's what you were investigating?" She nodded. Biodegra 9, marketed as completely environmentally safe, breaks down in landfills within months instead of centuries. A bitter laugh escaped her. "Except, it doesn't break down cleanly. It releases compounds that mimic estrogen." subtle enough that standard tests missed it, but my team developed a more sensitive detection method, and Keller buried it, along with my career. The energy around her hand subsided as she spoke. 3 years of research, Mike. Irrefutable evidence of contamination affecting wildlife first, then potentially humans. All erased because it threatened their billion-dollar product launch. Mike's analytical mind processed this information, fitting it with what he already knew about Neochem's meteoric rise. We should go back inside. Jess looked at him in disbelief. After that? I nearly caused a blackout. No one connected it to you, and now I understand why this matters. He offered his hand. Dance with me. What? One dance. Then we make a strategic exit. His expression softened. Show Keller and everyone else that you're not hiding. After a moment's hesitation, Jess placed her hand in his. The now familiar energy passed between them, but gentler this time, controlled. They returned to find the gala in full swing, a string quartet playing in the center of the main gallery. Mike led Jess directly to the dance floor, placing one hand at her waist while keeping a proper distance between them. I never mentioned I could dance, Jess said as they began to move with the music. You adjust your walking stride to match mine, Mike replied. Your movements are naturally rhythmic. It was a reasonable assumption. A small smile touched her lips. You really do observe everything. Not everything. I miss the connection between your environmental work and your condition. He guided her through a turn, aware of Keller watching from across the room. Do you think the lightning changed you because of your exposure to the chemicals? I've considered it. The wetlands where I was struck had high concentrations of biodigranine runoff. Her movements flowed perfectly with his, as if they'd danced together for years. But that's just speculation. As they turned again, Mike caught Keller's expression, a mixture of calculation and unease. He's watching us. Let him watch. Something in Jess had shifted, a new confidence emerging. I've spent 3 years hiding. I'm tired of it. The music swelled, and Mike drew her slightly closer. Their bodies moved in perfect synchrony, the energy between them harmonizing rather than sparking. For a moment, the rest of the gala seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of shared awareness. Then something extraordinary happened. As Jess looked up at him, their eyes meeting, Mike's vision shifted. Suddenly he was looking at himself, feeling the sensation of being held rather than holding. He could feel the fabric of his suit jacket beneath his, no, her fingers, sense the nervous energy she was controlling, experience the complex swirl of emotions she felt looking at him. The moment lasted only seconds before his perspective snapped back to his own body. Mike stumbled slightly, disoriented by the experience. What was that? He whispered. Jess's eyes widened. You felt it too? I saw through your eyes. I was you, looking at me. The lights around them pulsed once, subtly. The connection is strengthening, she murmured, faster than I expected. Before Mike could respond, the music ended. Applause broke the intimate moment, returning them to the public setting. We should go, Jess said, a new urgency in her voice. Now. The drive home passed in charged silence. Mike's mind raced with questions about what he'd experienced, while Jess stared out the window, the luminescent pattern on her shoulder occasionally visible through her wrap when they passed under streetlights. In the elevator to the penthouse, the energy between them was palpable, a magnetic pull that made the small space feel even more confined. When the doors opened, they stepped into darkness, the automated system sensing their presence, but not activating. The proximity effect is intensifying, Jess said quietly. Electronics will be unpredictable around me tonight. She moved through the darkened penthouse with familiar ease, the faint glow from her shoulder providing just enough light to navigate. Mike followed, drawn to her like a compass to north. In the living room, moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating Jess as she removed her wrap. The luminescent pattern was fully visible now, pulsing gently with her heartbeat. She made no attempt to hide it. What happened tonight, Mike began, when I saw through your eyes. Consciousness bleed through, she interrupted. It happens when two energy patterns become sufficiently attuned, like resonant frequencies. Is it permanent? I don't know. She turned to face him fully. This is uncharted territory for me too, Mike. He took a step closer, drawn by something beyond physical attraction. What else might happen as this connection strengthens? Shared dreams, emotional resonance, possibly shared physical sensations. Her voice remained clinical, but her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. Eventually, distance might not matter, and that frightens you. Wouldn't it frighten you, to be so connected to another person that boundaries blur? She gestured to the plants around them, which had grown visibly just during their evening away. Everything around me is affected by my presence, including you. Mike considered this, the scientist in him analyzing the implications, while something deeper responded to the raw vulnerability in her expression. I'm drawn to you, he admitted finally. I don't understand it. I can't quantify it. But it's real. It could be just the energy affecting your neurochemistry, she countered, though her voice lacked conviction. Is that what you believe? Jess looked away, the luminescence on her shoulder flaring briefly. What I believe doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm not safe. For whom? For anyone. She took a step back as he moved closer. Especially someone who matters to me. The admission hung between them, neither willing to close the final distance. The plants around them seemed to lean inward, growing perceptibly in the charged atmosphere. There's more you haven't told me, Mike said, suddenly certain. Jess met his gaze, moonlight reflecting in her unusual eyes. Yes, something about what you really are now. She nodded once, the movement barely perceptible. Something I'm still coming to understand myself. Mike extended his hand, stopping just short of touching her. Show me. Jess looked at his outstretched hand, fear and longing warring in her expression. After a long moment, she stepped back, shaking her head. Not yet, she whispered. I'm not ready for you to see everything. She moved past him toward her room, the glow from her shoulder illuminating her path. At the threshold she paused, looking back at him with an expression that contained both warning and promise. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, Mike. They're meant to be experienced. The emergency board meeting was called at dawn. Mike arrived to find his executive team already assembled, faces grim as they reviewed data on tablets and whispered in tense clusters. The atmosphere reeked of crisis. What do we know? Mike asked, taking his seat at the head of the table. His CFO, Eleanor Vance, spoke first. The whistleblower report went public an hour ago. They're claiming our new neural interface has undisclosed side effects, specifically that prolonged use causes subtle changes in brain chemistry affecting decision-making. Is it true? Mike's question silenced the room. Dr. Patel, head of R&D, cleared his throat. The effects are minimal and within acceptable parameters for medical devices. But yes, our internal testing showed some users experienced increased impulsivity and decreased risk assessment after extended use, which we documented and included in our FDA submission, Mike said. In the appendices, Eleanor clarified. Not prominently featured in the main findings. Mike's jaw tightened. So technically disclosed but effectively buried? Standard industry practice, offered Lawrence Chin, legal counsel. Every neural interface on the market has similar effects. We're being singled out because we're the market leader. The parallels to Jess's situation were unmistakable. Mike thought of her standing on that balcony, describing years of research erased to protect corporate profits. Options? He asked. Eleanor slid a tablet toward him. We've prepared 3 response strategies. First, aggressive denial and counterattack, questioning the whistleblower's credibility and methodology. Who is the whistleblower? Dr. Amara Wilson, brilliant neuroscientist, but she's had mental health challenges, recent divorce, financial troubles. We can use that. Mike's stomach turned. Character assassination, exactly what had happened to Jess. Second option, Eleanor continued, controlled disclosure. Acknowledge the findings but contextualize them as minor, already known to regulators and comparable to competitors. And third, Lawrence leaned forward. Full transparency, release all our data, announce additional safety studies, and temporarily restrict the device to medical settings until we better understand the long-term effects, which would cost us approximately $300 million in the next quarter alone, Eleanor added. The board strongly recommends option 1 or 2. Mike stood, walking to the window overlooking the Seattle skyline. In the reflection, he could see his team watching him, waiting for the pragmatic decision they'd come to expect from their CEO. 3 years ago, he said quietly, A brilliant environmental engineer discovered that Neochem's biodegradable polymer was leaching endocrine disruptors into groundwater. When she presented her findings, they buried the research and destroyed her reputation. That polymer is now in everything from food packaging to medical supplies. He turned to face them. "We are not Neochem." "Mike," Eleanor began, "this is business, not—" "This is integrity," he interrupted, "and it is very much business. We built this company on the promise of technology that improves lives. If our neural interface has undisclosed risks, we own that. Completely. The shareholders will weather a temporary stock hit better than a complete loss of public trust." Mike's tone left no room for argument. "Prepare the third option. Full transparency, additional safety studies, restricted usage until we're certain." Lawrence looked stunned. "You realize this decision may trigger a board review of your leadership. Then they can review it." Mike gathered his materials. Meeting adjourned. As the team filed out, Mike remained at the window, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. The decision felt right in a way that transcended business strategy. For the first time in years, he'd chosen based on principle rather than profit. He didn't notice Jess standing in the doorway until she spoke. "You chose the hard path." Mike turned, surprised. "What are you doing here? You forgot the environmental impact reports for your afternoon meeting." She held up a folder. "I overheard." "How much?" "Enough." She approached slowly. "You're risking your position for the truth." "It seemed like the only choice I could live with." He studied her face. Would it have made a difference? If someone at Neochem had taken a stand like that, it would have changed everything. Her voice was soft but intense, not just for me, but for the communities affected by that contamination. Outside, thunder rumbled. The storm was moving in faster than forecast, dark clouds swallowing the morning light. Jess glanced toward the windows, a strange recognition crossing her features. "This storm," she began, "just a spring thunderstorm." But even as Mike said it, he noticed the unnatural speed of the clouds, the peculiar greenish tint to the sky. "No." Jess moved to the window, placing her palm against the glass. "It's like the one that changed me. The electromagnetic signature is almost identical." As if responding to her words, lightning split the sky, striking a building 2 blocks away. The office lights flickered, computers rebooting as a power surge rolled through the building. "We should go," Mike said, gathering his things. "Get somewhere safer." Jess didn't move, her gaze fixed on the approaching tempest. "I need to tell you something. About what happened to me. What I've become." "Now?" "Now." She turned to face him, her scar beginning to glow visibly through her blouse. "Because this storm isn't random. It's connected to me, to us, and what's happening between us." Another lightning strike, closer this time. The building's emergency systems activated, warning lights pulsing as backup generators engaged. "When I died," Jess began, her voice steady despite the chaos outside, "I experienced something beyond conventional understanding. Not a tunnel of light or religious vision, but a merging, as if my consciousness expanded to connect with everything around me. Energy patterns, living systems, electromagnetic fields. The storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows with unnatural force. Wind howled between buildings, creating that same eerie wail Mike had heard the night he discovered her secret. When they revived me, that connection didn't fully sever." She unbuttoned the top of her blouse, revealing the luminescent pattern that now pulsed in perfect synchrony with the lightning outside. "I brought something back with me. Something that changed my physical form at a fundamental level." "What are you saying?" Mike asked, though part of him already understood. "I am saying I'm not entirely human anymore." The simple truth hung between them as lightning illuminated her transformed features, eyes glowing with the same blue-white energy as her scar, skin seeming to shimmer with internal light. "Part of me exists in a different energy state now, neither fully here nor fully elsewhere." As if to demonstrate, she turned toward the raging storm and raised her hand. The violent winds immediately around their building calmed, creating an eerie bubble of stillness amid the chaos. Rain continued to fall but no longer struck their windows, diverted by some invisible force. "My God," Mike whispered, "not God physics. Just not the kind science has quantified yet." Jess lowered her hand, the storm resuming its assault. I can interact with energy directly, influence it, sometimes control it. A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Mike's assistant rushed in, face pale. "Mr. Anderson, the building's being evacuated. A window shattered on the 32nd floor. We'll be right down," Mike assured her. When they were alone again, he turned back to Jess. "We need to continue this conversation somewhere safe." Jess nodded, rebuttoning her blouse. As they headed toward the emergency stairwell, a tremendous crash came from the roof. The building shuddered, lights failing completely as emergency alarms blared. "The main power relay," Mike explained as they joined the stream of evacuating employees. "Direct hit." They descended 20 flights in darkness, broken only by emergency lighting and the occasional glow from Jess's partially concealed scar. Outside, the storm had transformed downtown Seattle into a war zone. Downed power lines, debris flying through streets, cars with alarms blaring. As they sheltered in the building's underground parking structure with other evacuees, a security guard rushed in carrying something small and feathered. "Found it by the entrance," he explained, revealing a small sparrow, its wing bent at an unnatural angle. "Poor thing got caught in the wind." Without hesitation, Jess stepped forward. "May I?" The guard surrendered the injured bird. Cupping it gently between her palms, Jess closed her eyes. A soft blue glow emanated from between her fingers, visible even to the other evacuees, who murmured in confusion. When she opened her hands, the sparrow's wing had straightened. It chirped once, then took flight, circling the parking structure before finding an exit. The small crowd stared in stunned silence. Jess turned to Mike, her expression a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. "Now you've seen," she said quietly, "what I can do, what I am." Mike looked at her, really looked, seeing beyond the physical form to the extraordinary energy she embodied. His rational mind struggled to integrate what he'd witnessed, while something deeper recognized a fundamental truth. The universe was stranger and more wondrous than his limited perspective had allowed. "Yes," he said finally, "now, I've seen." The days following the storm passed in uncomfortable silence. Mike buried himself in damage control at Anderson Technologies, working 18-hour days to manage the fallout from their transparency announcement. The stock had plummeted 22% in 48 hours. 3 board members had called for his resignation, but it wasn't the corporate crisis keeping him away from the penthouse. It was the memory of Jess's glowing eyes, the bird taking flight from her hands, the witnesses murmuring in disbelief. When he finally returned home after 4 days, Jess was arranging fresh flowers in the kitchen. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "Welcome back," she said simply. Mike set down his briefcase. "We should talk about what happened." "Which part? Your ethical stand at Anderson Technologies or my revelation?" "Both. Neither." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't know how to process any of this. The others who saw, the security guard, the evacuees, they've convinced themselves they imagined it," Jess offered. "People are remarkably skilled at rationalizing the inexplicable." "And what about me? Should I rationalize it too?" Her eyes, normal now, no ethereal glow, held his gaze steadily. "That's your choice, but you've seen too much for simple denial." Mike poured himself a scotch, needing the familiar burn. "I built my life on rational principles, measurable outcomes, empirical evidence. And now? Now I don't know what's real anymore." He drained the glass. "I need time, space." Something flickered across her face, hurt, quickly masked. "I understand." "Do you?" He set the glass down harder than intended. "Because I don't. I don't understand any of this." "I never asked to become what I am," she said quietly. "The lightning chose me, not the other way around." "And what exactly are you, Jess? A human with supernatural abilities? Some kind of energy being wearing human form? A hallucination I'm having during a mental breakdown?" "I'm still me," she said, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "Still the person who makes your coffee and revives your plants and listens when you talk about quantum computing at 3 in the morning. But you're also something else, something I can't comprehend." "Yes." No denial, no elaborate explanation, just simple acknowledgement. Mike nodded, decision made. I'm staying at the downtown apartment for a while. I need normal. As he packed an overnight bag, Jess remained in the kitchen, perfectly still. Only the flowers betrayed her emotional state, their blooms closing slightly, colors dimming as if responding to her distress. Normal lasted exactly 17 days. Mike threw himself into work, into routine, into pretending his worldview hadn't been shattered. He even accepted a dinner invitation from Elise Harrington, the brilliant neurosurgeon he'd met at the charity gala. They dined at Canlis, discussing medical technology and market trends. Elise was everything he should want, intelligent, accomplished, conventionally beautiful. When she suggested drinks at her place afterward, he agreed without hesitation. Her penthouse in Belltown offered spectacular views, tasteful decor, and absolutely no inexplicable phenomena. They kissed on her balcony, the city lights spread below them. It felt pleasant, safe, utterly devoid of the electric connection he felt with Jess. "You're somewhere else," Elise observed, pulling back. "I'm sorry, work stress?" She studied him with clinical precision. "No, it's something else. Or someone." Mike couldn't deny it. "It's complicated." "It always is." She smiled ruefully. "Call me when it's uncomplicated." He left shortly after, walking Seattle's rain-slicked streets until dawn, thinking about what normal really meant and whether he actually wanted it anymore. At Anderson Technologies, the transparency strategy was working, albeit painfully. Their stock had stabilized after the initial drop. Medical journals praised their ethical stance. Competitors scrambled to review their own products, fearing similar scrutiny. "You were right," Eleanor admitted during their morning briefing. "Short-term pain, long-term gain." "Sometimes the right choice is the hardest one," Mike replied, thinking of Jess. As he returned to his office, he found James Chen waiting, his VP of International Relations and closest friend at the company. "You look terrible," James observed cheerfully. "Trouble in paradise?" "What paradise?" "The one with your mysterious live-in housekeeper, who's clearly much more than that." Mike froze. "What are you talking about?" "Please," James rolled his eyes. "I've known you 15 years. You've never looked at anyone the way you looked at her at the gala. It's not like that." "Then you're an idiot." James leaned against the desk. "Which is why I'm taking her to dinner tonight." Mike's head snapped up. "What?" "She called about some paperwork you left at the penthouse. We got talking. She's fascinating." James grinned. "And since you're clearly not interested—" "She agreed to have dinner with you?" Mike couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. "Don't sound so surprised. Some women find me charming." James checked his watch. "Picking her up at 7. Any objections?" A dozen objections rose to Mike's lips, none he had any right to voice. "No. Have fun." After James left, Mike found himself unable to focus. The thought of Jess with James, laughing, sharing confidences, perhaps more, created a physical ache in his chest. He told himself it was for the best. James was normal, rational, human in all the conventional ways. But that night, as he lay sleepless in his sterile downtown apartment, a violent thunderstorm rolled in. Lightning struck the building across the street, and for an instant, Mike could have sworn he saw Jess's face in the electric flash, her expression one of profound loneliness. The next morning, Mike received an unexpected visitor. Robert Keller, former CEO of Neochem, now retired and serving on various corporate boards. "Anderson," Keller greeted him, uninvited but undeterred. "Heard about your neural interface situation. Ballsy move going transparent." It was the right thing to do. "Right doesn't always equal smart." Keller settled into a chair. "But that's not why I'm here. Mutual acquaintance situation." Mike tensed. "Meaning?" "You're a housekeeper, Jessica Miller." Keller's expression was unreadable. "Brilliant mind. Shame about what happened." "You know Jess?" "Know of her. She was the whistleblower who nearly tanked our Biodegranine launch." Keller studied Mike's reaction. "But you already knew that." "Parts of it." "Did she tell you she was right?" Keller asked unexpectedly. "Because she was. The polymer degraded differently in certain soil conditions. created compounds we hadn't anticipated. Mike stared at him. You're admitting it? I'm retired, what can they do to me now? Keller shrugged. We buried her research, discredited her findings, made sure no reputable lab would touch her. Standard corporate defense. You destroyed her career. Business is war, Anderson, you know that. Keller leaned forward. But here's what interests me. Why is she working as your maid when she has one of the finest scientific minds of her generation? That's her business. Is it, or is there something else going on? Keller's eyes narrowed. There are rumors about her, strange ones. After her accident, Mike kept his expression neutral. What kind of rumors? Unexplained phenomena, equipment malfunctions, theoretical breakthroughs that shouldn't be possible without advanced computing. Keller stood. Just thought you should know who you're harboring. After Keller left, Mike accessed the secure server where he kept sensitive company information. In a folder labeled Potential Acquisitions, he found the file he'd created weeks ago but never opened. Jessica Miller. Neochem incident. The complete record was there, her original research. Internal Neochem emails discussing the cover-up. Medical records from her lightning strike. Even surveillance reports from private investigators Neochem had hired to monitor her after the accident. Mike read for hours, piecing together the full story of what had happened to Jess. The brilliance of her original research, the calculated destruction of her reputation, the mysterious phenomena following her revival. Equipment inexplicably repairing itself, plants growing at accelerated rates, weather patterns shifting during her emotional distress. Everything she'd told him was true. Everything she'd shown him was real. And he had walked away. When Mike returned to the penthouse that evening, he found Jess in his home office, standing at his computer with a stunned expression. On the screen was the file he'd been reading earlier. "You've been investigating me," she said, voice hollow. "Yeah, all this time you had evidence that could clear my name." She turned to face him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why didn't you tell me? I compiled it before I knew what you were. I wanted to understand who I'd invited into my home. And now? Now I understand more than I ever expected to." He approached cautiously. "Jess, I'm sorry I left. I was afraid." "Of me?" "Of what you represent. A reality beyond my comprehension." He gestured to the screen. "I can release this information, clear your name. Neochem would face massive lawsuits, but your reputation would be restored." She studied him for a long moment. "I could have accessed these files at any time, used them without your knowledge." "Why didn't you?" "Because they weren't mine to use." The simple integrity of her answer struck him deeply. Outside, thunder rumbled. Another storm approaching. Jess glanced toward the window, her scar beginning to glow faintly beneath her shirt. "It's coming again," she whispered. "Like that night." "The night you died?" She nodded, moving to the balcony doors. "I can feel it building, the same electromagnetic pattern." Mike followed her outside as the storm intensified, wind whipping around them. Lightning struck nearby, the thunder immediate and deafening. Jess gasped, her knees buckling. Mike caught her as another bolt hit even closer. "What's happening?" he shouted over the wind. "The pattern is completing," she managed, her entire body now illuminated from within, the cycle returning. The next lightning strike hit the building's rod directly above them. Instead of following the grounding wire, the electricity arced impossibly toward Jess, enveloping them both in blinding light. Mike felt no pain, only a strange sensation of expansion, as if his consciousness were suddenly freed from physical constraints. He was everywhere and nowhere, perceiving energy patterns, quantum fluctuations, the subtle dance of particles that formed reality. And Jess was there with him, her essence intertwined with his in this state beyond physical form. "This is what happened to me," her voice came, though not through sound. "This is what I experienced when I died." Mike understood then, not intellectually but fundamentally, what she had become, not a monster or alien being, but a human consciousness partially merged with the energy substrate of reality itself. The vision lasted seconds or eternities. Time had no meaning in that state. When awareness of his physical body returned, Mike found himself on the balcony floor, Jess cradled in his arms, both of them soaking wet but unharmed. "You saw," she whispered, her eyes returning to their normal color. "I experienced it," he corrected, helping her sit up. "I felt what happened to you." The storm was already dissipating, clouds breaking to reveal stars emerging in the night sky. Mike looked at Jess, really looked at her, seeing both the woman and the extraordinary being she had become. "I don't need normal," he said finally. "I need real. And you're the most real thing I've ever known." 3 weeks after the shared vision, Mike stood before a packed auditorium at the National Environmental Science Conference. Camera flashes punctuated the tense silence as he approached the podium. "Thank you for allowing me to address this gathering," he began, voice steady despite his racing heart. "Today, Anderson Technologies is releasing comprehensive data on our neural interface technology, both its benefits and its previously undisclosed risks." Murmurs rippled through the audience. In the front row, Eleanor and the board members watched with expressions ranging from resignation to quiet pride. "But that's not why I requested this platform," Mike continued. "I'm here to address a grave injustice perpetrated 3 years ago against one of the finest environmental scientists of our generation." On the screen behind him appeared Jess's original research on Neochem's Bio-Decro-9 polymer, the complete, unaltered findings she had submitted before the company buried them. Jessica Miller discovered that under specific environmental conditions, Bio-Decro-9 degraded into compounds that disrupted endocrine systems in aquatic life. Her methodology was impeccable, her conclusions irrefutable. In the third row, Jess sat perfectly still, her expression a careful mask. They had discussed this moment extensively, weighing the professional and personal implications. The decision had ultimately been hers, to reclaim her name publicly, whatever the consequences. Neochem responded by suppressing her research and systematically destroying her professional credibility. Mike's voice hardened. "I know this because Anderson Technologies considered similar tactics when faced with our own whistleblower situation. It would have been easier, cheaper, and morally indefensible." He gestured to the screen where side-by-side chemical analyses now appeared. "Our independent laboratory has verified Miss Miller's original findings. The full report is being released today to regulatory agencies worldwide and to every major scientific journal." The room erupted in chaos, journalists shouting questions, scientists examining the data on their tablets, Neochem representatives frantically making calls. Neochem's current leadership has been provided this information and given the opportunity to respond appropriately, Mike continued when the noise subsided. Their choices now will determine whether they face regulatory action alone or regulatory action plus class action litigation. He looked directly at Jess, whose composed facade had finally cracked, tears streaming silently down her face. "To Jessica Miller, the scientific community owes you an apology. Your work was visionary, your ethics unimpeachable. The truth you fought for will now protect countless lives." He paused, allowing the weight of his next words to settle. "And on a personal note, thank you for showing me that integrity isn't just about following rules, but about honoring truth, even when it defies our understanding." The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. The aftermath unfolded with dizzying speed. Neochem's stock plummeted 40% in a single day. 3 former executives, including Robert Keller, faced federal charges for falsifying environmental impact statements. Class action lawsuits were filed in 17 states. For Jess, vindication came with unexpected opportunities. Research institutions and environmental organizations worldwide sought her expertise. Universities offered teaching positions. Corporate boards requested her consultation on sustainability initiatives. After careful consideration, she accepted the position of research director at the Global Environmental Restoration Initiative, a prestigious nonprofit with resources rivaling major corporations and complete scientific independence. "It's perfect," she told Mike over dinner, 2 months after the conference. "I'll be leading my own team, developing remediation strategies for areas affected by chemical contamination." Including biodegranine sites? Mike asked, refilling her wine glass. Especially those. Her eyes sparkled with purpose. We're already developing a mycological approach that accelerates the breakdown of the harmful compounds. Mike smiled, recognizing the passion that had first drawn him to her. When do you start? Next month. They're establishing a new research facility here in Seattle. She hesitated. I've been looking at apartments nearby. The statement hung between them, a question neither had directly addressed since their reconciliation. Their relationship had evolved beyond employer and employee, beyond the initial attraction, into something profound but undefined. You could stay here, Mike offered carefully. Not as my housekeeper, as what exactly? Her gaze was steady, challenging. As my partner, in every sense. He reached for her hand across the table. If that's what you want. What about the complications? She gestured vaguely to herself, to the luminescent scar visible beneath her blouse. My unusual condition isn't going away. I'm counting on that, actually. Mike's expression grew serious. Anderson Technologies is establishing a new research division, the Quantum Energy Initiative, dedicated to studying phenomena that current science can't fully explain. Jess raised an eyebrow, such as humans who can manipulate electromagnetic fields. Among other things, he squeezed her hand. We need a scientific advisor who understands both conventional research methodology and unconventional energy manifestations. You want me to help study myself? She laughed softly. That's a conflict of interest. It's the perfect intersection of interests. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending that familiar current between them. You understand both worlds, the empirical and the inexplicable. Outside, rain began to fall. A gentle spring shower, not the violent storms that had marked their pivotal moments. Through the penthouse windows they could see the city lights, reflecting in countless droplets, creating halos of color. I won't be your employee, Jess clarified. I'll consult independently, maintain my position at Gary. Absolutely, professional equals. And personally? Her voice softened. What are we there? Mike considered this, choosing his words carefully. I think we're something science doesn't have a name for yet. Something rare and extraordinary. Her smile widened. That's uncharacteristically poetic for a man who built his fortune on quantum computing algorithms. I'm evolving. He stood, drawing her up with him. Come with me. There's something I want to show you. He led her to the guest bedroom, the room where they had first encountered each other that stormy night, where he had walked in on her changing and glimpsed the lightning pattern on her skin. But the space was transformed. The utilitarian guest room had become a conservatory of sorts. Lush plants filled every corner, their growth clearly accelerated beyond normal rates. Prisms hung from the ceiling, catching and refracting light in rainbow patterns across the walls. In the center stood a small fountain, water flowing over carefully arranged crystals. What is this? Jess asked, turning slowly to take it all in. An experiment. A gift. Maybe both. Mike watched her reaction carefully. I've been researching environments that might amplify or stabilize your energy patterns. You created this for me? Her voice held wonder as she moved among the plants, which visibly responded to her presence, leaves turning toward her like sunflowers tracking light. The plants are species known for high bioelectrical sensitivity. The crystals and prisms help focus and disperse energy in specific patterns. He gestured to the ceiling. And I've installed a Faraday cage variant that doesn't block electromagnetic fields but harmonizes with them. Jess closed her eyes, extending her awareness in that way Mike had come to recognize. It feels balanced, like the energy flows more easily here. As if in response to her words, the lights flickered, not in the erratic pattern of a power surge, but in gentle pulses synchronized with her breathing. The luminescent pattern on her shoulder began to glow, visible through her dress, but instead of the intense blue-white of a lightning strike, it emanated a soft golden radiance. It's working, Mike whispered, watching in fascination as the light spread across her skin in intricate patterns, illuminating the room with gentle warmth. "How did you know this would help?" Jess asked, opening her eyes, which now held that otherworldly glow but remained focused, controlled. "I didn't." Not with certainty, he approached her, unafraid of the energy emanating from her form. "But I've learned that some things can't be proven through conventional methods. Sometimes you have to trust what you feel." Outside, thunder rumbled, another storm approaching. But inside this sanctuary, the energy remained balanced, contained, harmonious. "The rational CEO trusting his feelings," Jess teased gently, though her expression was tender. "What would your board say?" "That I've lost my mind, probably?" Mike smiled, reaching for her glowing hand. Where once the contact had shocked him, now it felt like coming home, the energy between them familiar, welcome. "But I've gained something far more valuable." "And what's that?" "Understanding that the most profound truths exist in the space between what we can explain and what we can only experience." He drew her closer, the light from her skin enveloping them both. "That connection transcends logic. That love defies quantification." "Love?" she echoed, her free hand coming to rest against his chest where his heartbeat accelerated beneath her touch. "The most inexplicable force of all." Mike cupped her face gently. "And the only one that matters." As their lips met, the storm outside intensified, lightning illuminating the Seattle skyline, but within their sanctuary, a different kind of electricity flowed, controlled, purposeful, beautiful in its mystery. The plants around them bloomed spontaneously, releasing sweet fragrance into the air. Water in the fountain began to flow in impossible patterns, defying gravity. Light refracted through the prisms created dancing auroras across the walls. When they finally parted, Jess rested her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the charged air. "I spent 3 years hiding what I am," she whispered, "afraid of being studied, feared, exploited. And now I'm ready to understand it, to use it purposefully." Her eyes met his, human and otherworldly simultaneously. "With someone who sees both the scientist and the mystery." Mike smiled, embracing her fully as the glow from her skin enveloped them both. In that moment, the CEO who had built his empire on rational principles and measurable outcomes surrendered completely to the beautiful inexplicability of their connection. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, they had found their perfect balance, between power and vulnerability, science and mystery, the explainable and the transcendent. And in that balance they had found home. This story reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful relationships exist in the space between what we can explain and what we simply feel. If this touched your heart, please subscribe to Soul Lux Stories for more emotional journeys that transcend the ordinary. What unexplainable connection have